My name's Adam McLaughlin, and this is the Church Marketing Ideas Podcast. Practical ideas to help your church build trust in your community. Welcome to the Church Marketing Ideas Podcast, episode 002. You can find all of our show notes today at churchmarketingideas.com/002. And I'm excited to have Wes Gay on with me today. And he's going to be giving you a little bit of his history and his background, but you can win a copy of Building a Story Brand. Wes is a Story Brand certified consultant, and it's really easy to win a copy. To enter the draw, just take a screenshot of the podcast while you're listening today and post it on Twitter or Instagram and tag us at CMI Podcast. That's at CMI, like Church Marketing Ideas, at CMI Podcast. So take a screenshot of the podcast while you're listening today, and we're going to pick a winner to win a copy of Building a Story Brand, the book by Donald Miller. And also at the end of every single episode, and we're going to have a question from one of our listeners that I'll be answering. Today, the question at the end of the episode is about building a social media strategy and how your church can be intentional about building your social media strategy. So you want to listen right to the end to be sure you hear that question and that answer about building a social media strategy at your church. Well, I'm excited to have Wes Gay with us today. Wes Gay is a Story Brand consultant and runs the first Story Brand certified agency called Wayfinder. He got started in marketing and communications at his church growing up, and you'll hear a little more of his story in our interview coming up right after this word from our sponsors. Pastors, we know that the one piece of content that you put the most amount of effort into every week is your sermon. You're asking people for input, you're spending time, you're praying about it, and then you're presenting it on Sunday morning. What we do is we help you maximize the impact of that piece of content by taking your sermon, chopping it up into 3 to 5 minute clips to use on social media, and then linking it to your full sermon. Not only is it valuable for people in your church who missed your sermon on Sunday, but for people who are at church on Sunday, it's a reminder to them of what God is saying to your church, with the added benefit of reaching your community, giving them a sample of what it's like to visit your church. Go to sermonclipper.com. We can get started for you right away. Wes, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Hey, man, thanks for having me.
Man, I appreciate your time. And unfortunately, we're recording just after Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, I had a bit of a mishap at Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so I look, and it looks like I was in a fight on Black Friday. Like, my hand's pretty banged up, all this.
Yes, but did you get the TV?
I got the TV and I got the Legos. So
okay.
You should see the other guy, as they say. No, I had a little mishap I got a gas smoker. I was going to smoke turkey for Thanksgiving. Not like Colorado smoked turkey, like actually smoked it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And there was a problem with the ignition or the igniter, and there's apparently a leak down there somewhere. I pushed the button, whammo, I got hit with a fireball. And at least, like I said before we started, it's like the wind burn of snow skiing, but I didn't actually get to go snow skiing. So
without
all
the
pain,
fun.
Right. All the pain without the black diamond. So,
well, I appreciate you taking time anyway to hang out with me on the podcast and just give us a high-level overview of where you're at and what you're up to now.
Sure. Yeah, so a little over 3 years, I have been what's called a Story Brand Certified Guide. Now I run a Story Brand Certified Agency. We help organizations understand and implement the Story Brand framework in their business. So we do, right before this call, I was on a client call with a group I was with in San Diego a couple of weeks ago. We're trying to reposition their whole brand because they are a super confusing product in a super difficult industry. And the problem was they sounded like everybody else, but they weren't like everybody else. So we use this storytelling framework of Story Brand to help reposition them better for their target audience. Prior to that, for about 10 years, I worked in churches and nonprofits. Everybody listening knows you can have a title in a church, but it is useless because the bulk of the work is other duties as assigned by supervisor. My work typically was marketing, communications, IT, and I was only the IT guy because I was usually one, if not the only person under 40. And so in churches and nonprofits, if you're under 40, you're the IT expert.
Yeah.
which meant I just fixed printers and restarted Windows machines. Was literally that role. And then I did some worship stuff because my dad's a worship pastor, so I grew up in that world. Was a youth pastor at one point, all kinds of preached. I mean, I've done everything you can possibly do on a Sunday morning, from running camera to, I think I directed the choir one time in a church I was at, to preaching, to playing in the band. I mean, you name it, I've done it. So my day-to-day consists of running a business, right? So I'm in the world now where I got clients I'm working with and prospects I'm trying to sell to, and always creating new ideas, new products to deliver more things of value to the marketplace.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited to have you here, and I love bringing someone who understands church world, but also understands business world and can help us kind of merge the two, right? Take the principles from business world, but put it in a context that makes sense to help build trust and impact our communities through our churches. And the blog post that we're going to be talking about today is one that you wrote about failure and how you could make failure your New Year's resolution. So this is going to air early in January. If somebody hasn't already made their resolution, why would we choose failure as a New Year's resolution?
Sure. Full disclosure, I got that idea from John Acuff, so I'm not original. I just want to get that into the universe.
Sure.
In case our buddy John Acuff listens. So, one of the things that plagues everybody, and it's not just churches. I think sometimes churches think they are fully unique unto themselves. And the reality is there are things about a church that are unlike any other industry on the planet. For example, churches are the only industry I've ever seen that has a weekly deadline. It's always Sunday, right? The NFL has a weekly deadline for like 20 weeks out of the year. Churches have it 52 weeks out of the year, right? So nobody has a deadline like churches. But at the same time, the challenges, the frustrations, the hurdles, all that happens in business too, right? It's a lot of the same stuff. You've seen it too with your work. And so I think what happens is a lot of people tend to be plagued with ambition. We see what other people are doing. We see what's new. We have our great ideas, and the turning of the calendar of a new year. Now that we're in 2020 and everybody can have all their 2020 visions for churches, right? Now it's 2025. We're pushing it out 5 years because we didn't hit our 2020. But I digress. And so we have all these things. The problem is, though, we never stop and think about what should we stop doing? Like, what should we eliminate? Because if you look at people who are the greatest in the world at what they do, regardless of what they do, I'm talking everybody from Jay-Z to Tiger Woods to Disney. I mean, you name it, whether it's an individual, an athlete, a brand, whatever. The best in the world tend to be laser focused on what they do really well, and they forget everything else, right? And in order to be more effective, we've got to limit what we're doing. So when I talk about failure as a New Year's resolution, it's being willing to say, what am I going to stop doing? What am I going to take off my plate? What am I going to say no to? And these are good things. How do I say no to the good things so that I can say yes to more of the best things? All right. So for example, obviously a lot of people that are listening are probably Apple fanboys and Apple fangirls, right? We have all the Apple things.
Yeah.
But if you look at a brand like Apple, they have admitted some things that don't work. Like, people might forget Apple had a social network. Remember Ping? It was their social network within iTunes. Now, if Apple wanted to, they could probably dominate that space, but it would take too much resources, too much time, too much diversion away from their core offering of great hardware and great software that's integrated really, really seamlessly, better than anybody else on the planet, right? So when it comes to churches, we have to be willing to say, what am I going to say no to so I can say no to more things so I can say yes to the right things? And that's hard because, especially when we're in communities online and other groups of people like us in our roles in different churches, there's sometimes a little bit of bigger, faster, stronger mentality. We have to keep up. They're doing this, so we should do that. We should try to pursue this. We should try to get this done. And there's almost like there's a philosophical pressure on people. Now, I say that because if you're familiar with the story brand framework at all, one of the things we talk about is every brand should solve a problem, right? So I'll talk a lot about brands like CarMax is a great one. Chick-fil-A is a great one. They solve multiple layers of problems. Right. Because in a story, it's never just the problem, the surface level issue, like the bomb's going to explode. It's always the bomb's going to explode and the bomb's underneath an orphanage and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was an orphan and now he's missing his leg because he stepped on a landmine, and can he defuse the bomb? But he was mocked in middle school, and there's all these layers to stuff, right? And so there's always this kind of philosophical fundamental issue. And so I think in churches, we think that we have this philosophical pressure of we should be doing all the things. We should be on every social network, even though our church is probably only 600 people. We should kill the bulletin because somebody else did, when in reality, bulletins are great. We shouldn't have a church app because somebody says we shouldn't, or we should have a church app, or we should, there's all this pressure. And so I think if we can do things, okay, I would much rather kill some stuff and stop doing some things and be willing to try and fail and say, okay, nope, I'm going to put that over here so that I can be better at these things here. For example, at a church, you might need to say, hey, or here's an example. I worked at a church one time where the pastor kept saying, we have to invest more energy on Twitter. I like Twitter personally. It's the only social network where anybody can connect to anybody really, really easily, and conversations can get really fun. The kinds of connections you see between celebrities and normal people happens only on Twitter. It doesn't happen anywhere else. Right. It's really kind of fun. All the cool stories are from Twitter. But we were like, we're a church of 1,500. We have 142 followers. Take out the staff, it's like 135. Why are we investing on Twitter when we have an audience on Facebook? It's like, oh, we need to reach people on Twitter. But why? I like Twitter. Just our audience isn't there. So why don't we invest in Facebook and Instagram and nothing else? Right? Why don't we invest in Facebook and Instagram in our email list? Right? Let's be willing to say yes to the right things and say no to everything else.
Yeah, and I love the conversation that it's not just what is the right thing or the wrong thing, but you mentioned earlier something might be good, but the real question is it the best?
Yeah.
Is it the best for who we're trying to reach? Is it the best solution for our concern? So that's one of the traps that I think we fall into at churches, is saying that church is or isn't doing it, so that means it's right or wrong. Whereas instead of saying that church is doing it that way because they're working to reach that audience, we could do it this way because our audience is different. So unpack a few more practical examples of that for us.
Yeah. So here's a super practical one. My first church I served, I worked for a nonprofit in college, after college, and then I went on staff at a church a year or two later. And within 6 months, I was put on we didn't have a communications department. There was 1,200 or 1,500 on weekend attendance. I was put on I think we called it like a communications review team or something. Churches love committees and team titles. And so it was me and a handful of other staff members. And the church had built a new facility in 2007. And then 2008 hit. So we were super in debt, right? What a time to build a new facility. And so anyways, they had tried to be this young, it was really kind of like, they wanted to be this hip, Gen X friendly, super edgy church. And, they played Crazy Train on Sunday morning. They played one of the funniest country songs ever called I'll Pray For You. If y'all haven't listened to it, it's hilarious.
We'll YouTube it in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that. They did a series on Farmville because Farmville had been big at that point. And it was like, what are we doing? And so when they built the building, one of the things they did was they named the lobby the concourse. And I was like, all right. And then they named we're Baptist. We're Southern Baptist since 1882 or something. Or 1870 something. And they had named the fellowship hall the conference hall. So we're in this little communications meeting and I'm running it. And I said, hey, why do they call it the concourse? And somebody said, oh, well, we thought that was fresh and blah, blah, blah. I said, what was the last building you went in with a concourse? And they sat there and the facilities guy was in the room and he was like, the Atlanta airport. I was like, yeah, we're a church. We're not the airport. We have a lobby. We don't have a concourse. Right. So what happened was we were trying to be something we weren't at the end of the day. The other thing was I said, we're Baptist, we fellowship, we don't conference. Call it the fellowship hall. But what was happening is we were trying to live into this identity that was not us. Right. And that's the fundamental issue, I think, is churches will play the comparison game and ignore the context of the community around them. They want to see what other churches are doing and jump onto church trends when in reality, most of our staff doesn't even care about church trends, much less the people who are coming in the seats every week. And so we decided, you know what, we're a First Baptist church that's been around since the late 1800s. We have, in some cases, 2, 3, 4 generations of families who were there. I did a video interview for a guy one time. He was in his 80s. The only other church he'd ever been to was when they would have Sunday services on the beaches of France in World War II. I was like, he said that, and I looked at the staff like, I was like, what? Anyways, but that was who we were. And so when we decided to live more into who we were, and identify who we were, it helped us start to say no to more things. It's the same process I think a lot of us go through in our own lives, right? So I always tell people, whether it's in business or personally, if you want to figure out what you should be doing or what you're really good at, start by listing all the things you either hate doing or are not good at. All right. Like my first job out of college, worked for this nonprofit. We did leadership training and development for middle and high school students. And one of the illustrations we always used was the David statue of Michelangelo, right? So when Michelangelo sits down and he sees this giant, probably very, very expensive block of marble, Michelangelo sees the David statue inside of it. But what does he do? He has to chip away at it and keep pulling stuff back until he gets to that point where they say you're finished, not when you can add anything else, but when you can't take anything else away. Right. And so I think the real issue for churches is, what is our identity? Right. I went to a church here not far from me. I live north of Atlanta. My wife and I went a couple of years ago, and we walked in because we were looking for a new church. And I immediately thought, why is nobody on stage dressed like anybody in this room? Like, there were 600, 700 people in the room. Not a soul on stage looked anything like anybody in the room. And I'm not saying you need to dress business casual or whatever we were dressed like. I'm just saying, be who you are in the place you were in. Don't dress like you're at Hillsong if you're in, I don't know, Jasper, Georgia. It's a town, it's a little bit town, North Georgia. Who cares? That's not where you are. So this is obviously, I think, a more fundamental conversation. But if we can get comfortable with who we are, it also means we're comfortable with who we're not. And when we finally make that decision and we stick to it, we're really being wise, because whether it's business or it's church, in churches, we only have so much time, energy, money, and attention that we can invest. So we're spending our time and spending our energy and spending our money on things to promote or to get people involved or to move them forward in next steps or to get them to become leaders or volunteer, whatever. And we only have so much attention of our audience. None of this is unlimited. So if we only have such a finite amount, if we spend it wrongly, we lose their trust, but we also lose out on opportunities to get them to really engage and connect with us.
So dig in for me a little bit, because I think churches tend to fall into a ditch on either side of this road. And one of the ditches is that we are who we are and take it or leave it. Sure. And then the other ditch is we're going to figure out who we want to reach and we're going to cater everything to them exactly. Yeah. How can you find the balance in between those two, where you're genuine to who you are and at the same time you're meeting a need that people in your community have?
Yeah. So I guess it was spring of 2018. I'd worked with a lot of people familiar with PushPay. I worked with them for a while in a bunch of different capacities. One of the things I did with them was they kind of did a multi-city tour, and I would speak and do the StoryBrand presentation as part of it. Well, one of their marketing directors, a lady named Becca Johnson, who is genius. She's going to be embarrassed if she hears this. She's in the Church Comms group. She is one of the most brilliant marketing minds I've ever encountered. It's incredible. So she did this whole talk on personas for churches. And I vividly remember where I was. We're sitting in Nashville. There's probably 25 or 30 churches represented. And she said, hey, everybody identify one audience or one persona, in marketing we call it, that your church is really equipped to reach effectively. The way you do that is think about who normally comes to your church and who physically lives in your community. And so we do it, and she goes to all of them. And out of the 25 or 30 churches, no two churches had the same audience. And I was speaking, I think, after her, so I'm sitting off to the side, and she just looks at me like, right? I mean, and Nashville's not huge, and there's a million people or whatever in Metro Nashville. And she immediately said, now, why are we in competition with each other? We've just identified 25 churches in Nashville, some are pretty good size, that aren't reaching the same people at all. And I thought, what a moment. So I think, so when it comes to churches, is it, we are who you are, get on board or get out the door, or we're going to change everything and not really know who we are, but we want to be effective. I think the middle ground becomes, first of all, what has God gifted your church with? Like, what are you really maybe good at? What are you equipped with? Where are you physically located? Again, the church of the pastor was keen on Twitter. He really was annoyed we didn't have a thriving college ministry. And we were like, we're not in a college town. You, by definition, you can't have college students if you don't have a college nearby. It just doesn't work that way, right? Why are we investing in a college ministry when the closest college is 30 minutes away and it's just a small community college, and the big state school is over an hour away? Nobody's driving an hour to us. They're just not. But that's okay. The churches around the schools, they can invest in college ministries to make sense for us. So I think it starts with, where are you located? What are the demographics in a 3 to 5 mile radius of where you are? I think sometimes we have aspirations of reaching people beyond that because we think, oh, it would be really great if we reached X. But those people don't live there, right? There's people who are 1, 3, 5 miles away. So start there. That's where I start. The second thing I would do is look at, what has God either gifted your church at, or where has God placed your church? What does your church just kind of naturally have a bent towards in terms of kind of the existing culture? And then third, how do you marry those two? So how do you take the people who live in your community, the people who are already engaged in your church, and then how do you kind of match those two? Say, we're going to reach more people like the ones that are in our church because we know for whatever reason we're really effective at reaching these people. But we also realize there are new audiences in our community that we're not really sure are being reached effectively. So let's develop a strategy to expand as well, because this is who God's called us to serve in our community.
Right. And I think that sums it up perfectly, where we can find a balance. When I talk with churches, I ask them, do they lean 60-40 this way or 60-40 that way? Because I want to be really clear that it has to be, close to a balance. When we're talking about finding that balance, and we're talking about reaching new people, when do we know that it's time to expand what we're trying to do to reach new people? And what are some of the indicators that it might be time to more narrowly focus?
Well, I would always start with, you should always start by narrowing your focus. So one of the things with our clients all the time that I tell people that we have to get them on board with is, the more specific you are, and this is a marketing thing, the more specific you are in marketing, the more effective your marketing is going to be. One of the best examples ever is, I got it on my bookshelf over there somewhere, is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. It's one of the most popular books written in the last 12, 13 years. It was written 2007, 2008. And on the 10th anniversary of that book, he did an interview had a conversation on his own podcast. Easy to promote, I guess, on your own podcast, about the book. And one of the things he said was the first draft was awful. But he said he knew he had things in there he wanted to share. So he went back and wrote the second draft. He rewrote the whole thing. He wrote it was basically a long form letter to 2 really good friends. One was really struggling personally with family and relationships, just a lot going on. The other one was struggling professionally. And he literally thought, if this book helps these 2 guys, I've done my job. He has sold like 3 million copies.
Right.
And his whole brand is built on that book. I mean, it is consistently still 12 years later, one of the top 3 or 5 books highlighted on Amazon, without a doubt, right? Everything has come from that book, but it started by being really, really specific. So I'm convinced the more you narrow your focus, the more people understand, oh yeah, that's for me. Because when you go broad and vague and big picture, we're all left wondering, is that for me? I'm not really sure. I don't know exactly. So the first thing is try to get really specific. There's a church out of Phoenix, Christ Church of the Valley. They have, 6 or 7 campuses, run thousands a weekend. And I got to have a conversation with one of their XPs last year, and he was telling me they have one persona that they reach. And they said it's a church of thousands and thousands and thousands. And he said, we call him Max. We made up a name. He said he's in his early 40s. He's a white-collar business professional, because that's where we are. And he said he's probably got 2 or 3 kids. Kids are late elementary, probably more middle school, just based on his age. And he starts running down the list. And he said, everything we do is geared towards that guy. Our church swag is Nike golf polos with our church logo, because we live in Arizona. People play golf. Like, we don't need coveralls because it's not cold enough. I mean, I know people in Arizona and California freak out if it's below 60, but it's still reasonable enough. He said the reason is, we knew if we could focus on the dad and get the dad in the door, the whole family's going to come. We have a much greater chance to reach the dad. So that's what everything started toward, and they're doing really, really well. First thing I would say is narrow that focus and say, okay, specifically, let's quantify 1, 2, or 3 maybe types or groups of people we know our church is really effective at engaging with. It could be young families. It could be more middle-aged, kids are a little bit older. Or you know who those groups are.
Right.
And sometimes it means language specific groups. You've got strong communities of people who are English as a second language. You have to think out of the box. So once you get really, really specific, then it actually opens the door and says, okay, now that we've kind of painted our box and we know exactly the field we're playing in, we can better understand the rules and know, okay, now we can go reach those people. And this is something that's always happening in business, right? We're always looking at sales and marketing. The difference in church is, unlike a business where you do marketing and business to your current customers because you want to keep them coming back and keep them engaged and lifetime value and all that. But in church, what we're actually doing is we're using the people who are our quote unquote customers, or the people who are already engaged, and we're using them to help us go out. So then it becomes, what is our strategy to use our people to go out and reach more people? And it becomes this multiplying effect that's always happening. I always think about, how do we use our people to reach more people? Because that is part of the discipleship process. That's part of continuing to grow our church and continuing to fulfill the Great Commission and doing what our church is called to do.
So what do you say, or how do we explain to a leader who might be listening, or somebody who has to now go explain to their leader this idea, and the pushback that the leader has is, well, our church is welcoming to everybody.
Sure.
So
there's a difference between welcoming to everybody and serving somebody really, really well. Like I didn't say that, first of all, I didn't say that anybody was a sole audience, right? You have primary audiences and you can be welcoming to anybody. That's fine. But it's going back to, where's your church located? Who lives in your area? And do you feel like you're really, really equipped to serve? Right. Knowing you're going to be welcoming to anybody. If your church is geared towards young families, but if you have a couple in their late 60s that moves to town and loves your church, you're not going to say leave.
Right.
I mean, some people might, because they think they're allergic to old people in churches, which I don't understand. And that's a whole separate episode. But I think it just really becomes, you can be welcoming to all, but at the end of the day, you only have so many resources. You only have so much time. You only have so much attention of your audience. You have to make the decision to say, what is best for the people we're trying to reach? It's going to be most effective and bring the best quote unquote return, so that we can be good stewards of what we've been given.
So Wes, somebody's listening right now and they're saying, okay, I've got my New Year's resolution. I'm ready to quit. Where do I start? What would you say is the number one way to evaluate the first step in figuring out what you need to quit?
Quit going to meetings. No, I'm just kidding. Quit your next meeting. Kidding. That's a great question. So I would look at kind of super tactical things. Like, what are some of the things that are on your calendar in terms of tasks, projects, or responsibilities that you handle often that you go, I just don't think this is working. Like, why are we doing this? It could be inefficient. It could be ineffective. It could be, that kind of thing. Because I think if you focus there, that's a lot easier than trying to go really big picture. Why do we have this program? Why do we have this ministry? Why do we devote staff resources to this? Those are big, high-level things that are harder to answer. But start with the things that you have full control over. I'm stealing this example I heard from a guy who's a senior vice president at Chick-fil-A years ago. And he said everything falls into one of three buckets: things you can control, things you can influence, and things you can neither influence nor control. So I'd start with, what are the things that you control in your job, in your world, right? Start there and say, okay, maybe it's, look at all of our social networks. It's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Justin Dean if you listen to Justin Dean, you're not on Snapchat. I have no idea
or
about
TikTok.
I'm not on TikTok, so I have no idea. But I mean, evaluate all the things you're doing, all the places you are. Just look at all of it and say, okay, what either makes me want to run from the building screaming every time I see this, or what do I think is just really not effective? Like, it's not reaching people, it's not engaging, it's not helping our church do what we need to do. It's a real drain on us. My guess is people listening to this before going through that process already know the answer. They could probably name 3 to 5 things right now. They're like, man, I just really wish I could quit it. So then your next thing becomes, can you really stop doing that do you have full authority? Great, stop it. Or delegate it, hand it off to somebody else, maybe look to be more efficient about it. But I'd start with things that you have full control over that are super tactical, and create a little bit of breathing room and say, okay, I'm going to stop doing these things in the new year. It's just not worth it. We may pick those things back up later, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I will encourage people and say, I'm potentially working with a church in 2020, It's one of the 10 largest churches in the country. And they want to go through the story brand process, but they really, I'm part of another guy who's bringing me in. He's another outside guy where he's trying to help their executive team build their whole strategy. They've got 9 or 10 campuses, tens of thousands of people a weekend, and there's no process for filtering decisions.
Wow.
It's like, how did we get to this point? And I've talked to other people. I've talked to a guy who's on staff at one of the top 3 churches in the country. I posted that comment somewhere, and he texted me. He's like, "Hey man, we're having the same problem." It's like everybody has that problem. So there are the big churches too, who are trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to cut back so we can continue growing? Right? Where do we need to trim over here so we can focus more over there? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to, are you and your church staff being good resources of the time, money, and attention that you're given in order to reach the most people and be as effective as you can be?
Wes, man, so much to take in a single interview. I know this is going to be one that I personally am going to listen to a few times, and I hope our listeners will re-listen back to them. If they have some questions about some of the things we've talked about, some of the ideas we've talked through, what's the best way for them to connect with you? What's your social media network?
The one I default to the most is actually Twitter, because it's the easiest, and you're limited to 280 characters, so I can't be sold on your multi-level marketing product as easily. And I can't hear your political rant. I can't read your political rants as much, and I can mute certain words. So Twitter @Wes Gay. I'm on Instagram @Wes Gay. I'm actually on Facebook too, facebook.com/Wes Gay. I'm in the church communications group. I'm not on TikTok. I don't see the point. By the way, sidebar, I think from what I've seen on TikTok, the best stuff I've seen comes from like teenagers and dads trying to outdo their teenagers. Because some of the TikTok videos I've seen of dads in their 40s are unbelievable. It is like dad jokes gone live. It's amazing. So anyways, but Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is the best place to find me.
Sounds good. And your blog, of course, wesgay.com.
Yeah, sorry for the cough. I had to
That's
mute.
all right.
Viral infections don't translate through podcasts, so just hear that. We're not there yet.
wesgay.com. And if a church wants to hire you to come in and help them get themselves organized on the same page using the story brand framework, give us a high-level overview of what that process looks like.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways we do it. We typically do it on site, because what we found is with churches, for businesses, churches, nonprofits, getting everybody in the room actually forces you to finally have some conversations people typically don't have. And it's really because you don't know what conversations to have. You may know there's a problem around, for example, I was in San Diego 2 weeks ago with a company. They couldn't talk about their company the same way. I literally had everybody write down, 15 people in the room, what does your company do? Everybody was different. And we were like, we have a problem. And secretly, I'm like, this is job security, because now I can stay around. So get everybody in a room. We're going to walk through and figure out, okay, from a messaging perspective, how do we position your church well in the mind of the people who are hearing it, reading it, seeing what you're doing, so that they go, oh yeah, I need to go check that place out. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's the place that I need to try. So that's what it looks like. We're usually a half day or a full day, depending, and then we'll do, got some other options there as well. But that's what a typical engagement looks like.
Wes, thank you so much for hanging out today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Pastors, we know that the one piece of content that you put the most amount of effort into every week is your sermon. You're asking people for input, you're spending time, you're praying about it, and then you're presenting it on Sunday morning. What we do is we help you maximize the impact of that piece of content by taking your sermon, chopping it up into 3 to 5 minute clips to use on social media, and then linking it to your full sermon. Not only is it valuable for people in your church who missed your sermon on Sunday, but for people who are at church on Sunday, it's a reminder to them of what God is saying to your church, with the added benefit of reaching your community, giving them a sample of what it's like to visit your church. Go to sermonclipper.com. We can get started for you right away.
Could you give me some ideas on developing a social media strategy? We've seen a few things work, but it's not a strategy. I don't want to be just promoting our church's events. And I also don't want to be asking random questions like, What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? When that has nothing to do with our church. Thanks.
So your social media strategy is made up of two pieces, and one piece is the content and one piece is format. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you were going to talk about a new outreach program that your church is doing. That is the content. Now the format could be, you could do a quote about that, you could do a picture about that, you could do a video about that, you could do a blog post about that, you could send out an email about that. All those things are the format, but the content is the outreach. And so what I would do is I would make a list of all the different ways that your church has the opportunity to format social media posts or blog posts, or that might be video, that might be a text overlay on a graphic, that might be a text overlay on a picture of your pastor or a picture of somebody who's engaging with your church or engaging with that outreach. It could be a sermon clip from Sunday morning. That could be a clip of your announcement video. So all of those are the format. And then the other thing I would do is make a list of your content. So what are all of the things that you could be talking about on your social media channels about your church? That could be, maybe that's small groups, maybe that's your podcast, maybe that's the opportunity to watch online, maybe that's clips on YouTube, maybe that's your blog content, maybe that's kids volunteers, maybe that's volunteers for an outreach that you do at a local school, maybe that's an outreach that you do at a local nursing home, maybe there's, in the winter you shovel driveways and there's a team to do that, and in the summer you do VBS and you're always looking for volunteers to do that. So what are all the content options? What are all the things that you can talk about regularly? Maybe you even break that down. So in your small groups, you're not just saying, hey, join a small group, but you're talking about each one of your 20 small groups. So this small group does this, and this small group does that, and that small group's about prayer, and this small group is about gardening, and this small group is a great opportunity to invite your friends to learn about X. And so you create this list of content, you create this list of format, and then you start matching the two so that you don't get bored. And not only that you don't get bored, but your audience doesn't get bored of hearing the same things in the same way. So you want to take those two pieces, your content and your format, and find ways that they can intersect. So let's just take for example, a piece of content is a small group that's all about prayer. So one week you could do a video in that small group of them praying. One week you could do a quote about prayer from the small group leader. One week you could do a scripture about prayer and put that on a graphic, and then put that as a link to the small group registration. So what are all the different things that you need to talk about content, and all the different ways you can talk about them? That's format. And then filter everything through your church's core values. So if you value 4 different things, let's say you have 4 core values, then figure out how everything fits into those core values and talk about them in that way. So because we value prayer, we have a prayer small group, here's the link to register. Or because we value impacting our community, we're doing this event, so here's the link to sign up for that. Or because we value impacting our community, here's what we did last Saturday, and here are a few pictures from that. So you want to filter all of those things or communicate consistently through your core values, and you want to intersect content and format. From there, put all those pieces together and find different ways and keep changing it up, and find all the variables that you can to build a strategy for what kind of content your church can post on social media. Thanks for the question. By the way, if you have a question, feel free to go to churchmarketingideas.com, click the button that says Ask a Question. Coming up on the next episode.
When we're looking at the message, the key point is to get the message out. But if I've used math as an example, I was used this example before, when we're talking about, let's say the gospel is the number 4. So we're the 4 ministry. Our goal is to get the 4 out to the masses. And whether it's 2 plus 2, which is everybody coming to the sanctuary on Sunday, that's one of the ways. But there's the 1 plus 3 people that I want to watch the message when it's rebroadcast. There's the 3 plus 1 people that want to reach another way. There's, the 2 times 2 people. There's so many different ways that you can get that 4 out to the masses. So don't restrict the way you're doing it with saying, we've always been the 2 plus 2 ministry, the 2 plus 2 church for years, and then get mad because the 1 plus 3 people still want that 4 message that you have. They just don't want it the way you've done it traditionally.